Hello, my friends. Sean Allen here in Chicago will be on the line with the brilliant Dr. Iva Werlop momentarily. Let's see. It's Friday. It's September the 30th. I just got off the phone last night with Todd over at South Loop CrossFit, and we did a great podcast very late into the evening, and Todd and I have become friends over the last year, and he's got a great CrossFit place down there in Chicago at South Loop CrossFit, and he's got a podcast. It's pretty good, and he asked me to be a guest, so we're going to have that show up for you guys. He told me that it would be up around sometime mid-October. So once that's up, I'll just share his link over on our site. We had a great discussion about a lot of the things that you guys are familiar with here, and it was an hour of me and him just kind of going back and forth and sharing ideas and thoughts and some of the complexities and problems that he sees as a CrossFit coach. Todd is kind of at the top of the heap when it comes to knowledge base, at least in my opinion. He's a neat fellow, sneaks into seminars that he probably shouldn't be in just to gain the information, and I really respect somebody like that. So that's something for you guys to look forward to. This is podcast 112. I think I have one or two more in the hopper here, and we're recording next week. We're trying to get one more in here before the end of the month. And so we've got just one sponsor. I'll just mention them very, very briefly just for a second. It's Ultra Running. We've been using these guys on our feet for a long time. Some of the best running shoes out there, in my opinion. They use the A-bound foam. They got the wide toe box, the nice fitting vamp over the top, zero drop. The A-bound foam has got arguably some better resilience than the EVA foam that's out there. They make a really fine product, and I wear their Ultra every day, which is a suede black, and they've got brown as well. Shoe, it's kind of a casual shoe. I wear that around the office. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. They just came out with a desert boot, and Golden over there is sending me a pair of those guys. So as soon as I have some experience in those, I will certainly share my thoughts and feelings on those with you guys. So that's it. Nice, short, sweet sponsor. Sometimes short is better. So Ivan and I do not talk about products on here that we do not believe in. We've recently had some dialogue with Squarespace. I've reached out to Garmin. So we're putting some sponsorships together that are important. And since I mentioned Squarespace, they've helped me put up the new TheGaitGuys.com site. If you guys are still over on Tumblr, everything is still there and will be there. But everything is actually packaged nicely over on TheGaitGuys.com, which just launched in the last 2 weeks or so. Everything is there that you guys need. The podcasts, it's a one-stop shop now, guys. We realize that, where are they on YouTube, and where's their Tumblr, and where's their store, and how do I find their continuing education classes, and where's the blog, and I can't find the link. Well, everything is there, okay? The search box is on the site. So I redid that in about, an evening and a half. Squarespace is a great product, and if you guys have any questions about that, email me. I'll tell you the templates that I used and everything else. So I actually used the same template for my personal site, drallen.co, and I revamped that in the last week. Ivo uses the Squarespace as well, and I also launched seanallen.net, and that you will see that from time to time over there on our blog and social media and stuff. The occasional article that I put up, the occasional piece of art that I put up, I'm doing more art in the form of movement and bodies. I've got a series coming up that are probably going to be some lifting and CrossFit and exercise related ones. So some are sketches, some are paintings. Hope you guys will enjoy those. They're for sale if you want to buy them. So anyways, those are the sites, and that is it. We got a great podcast. I'm going to shut up, and we're going to get over to the podcast. Hang in there. Here we go. So we've got a good show lined up, and we just launched one today, and the numbers just cranked right back up again, even though we took a little sabbatical here. And we've got some really great stuff here. This podcast might initially take a little bit of a sharp right-hand turn here, or left-hand turn, because of the topic at hand. But I really think, because this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, I think this is really important that your brains are thinking about this stuff. And I'll preface this with a reason, with my reasoning. Where's medicine going to be going? I get a lot of emails every single week about people asking, hey, I've got this, and they give us the whole laundry list of what their problems are, despite the fact that we've asked people not to do that. We understand, hey, what's the harm in trying, right? And they say, well, these are my symptoms, and I've got some video from a gait analysis place, and I'll send that along to you if it's okay. I hope you can help me. Please, I've been everywhere, that kind of thing. It's always touching that we get these things, but it also, shares the desperation of a lot of folks, and it kind of breaks our heart a little bit, because we know we could probably help them out a little bit if we could actually get them in a room. The problem is that a lot of the times, we get a three-dimensional video, and I've talked about two-dimensional, three-dimensional, parallax view, and the problem is that when we get a video, it's not giving us real space information, and we need something in 3D, and we need to be able to look at something and see all those dimensions to pick up on the little things, because two-dimensional imaging really just kind of, it leaves something to be desired. And also, we don't have our own physical exam. And so I've been thinking a lot about the next stage of technology, and virtual reality is going to be the next thing. And I keep thinking, wow, if we could get someone's video in three-dimensional virtual reality and really kind of be there in the space, we've got half the problem solved. And we could probably devise some screens that would allow us to get close on the physical exam. And so technology is on its way. And it's going to save the day, but it's also going to create some vocational problems with people. And this article is called Job Security, it's from Tech Insider. And it's called The Age of EMS, EMS. I'm going to be mentioning that name over and over again, the EMS or EMS. And what are they? Well, I'll talk about that in just a moment. But can AI replace skills is kind of where we're going on this. So this article is worth your time looking at. It'll probably scare you a little bit, but I think that if we're prepared, the fear drops down a little bit. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, the singularity and Ray Kurzweil, and the approximation of the human with technology and computers and chips. And we're seeing a lot of it, as we've discussed in many podcasts, about prosthetics and how they're wiring it into the nervous system. And we'll talk about it in just a moment in the second piece about using the EEG from the brain to tap into the computer of the prosthetic in order to move the prosthetic. And this is being done in science right now. So really, computers and a lot of this stuff is coming along. In a recent podcast, we talked about this little thing that they would stick, a little receptor or transistor that they would insert into a blood vessel near an area of the brain to try and stimulate someone who had a stroke or something like that. So so this guy's name is Robin Hanson, and he wrote a book called The Age of M. And he's saying that we're going to develop cheap technology for emulating brains on computers in the next 100 years. So he explains emulations or EMs to be like human brains, but able to run about 1,000 times faster and be copied. And he predicts that we will quickly put every human out of work and create a radical new civilization. Even if Google has a human CEO at the very top, a human CEO can't make very fast decisions like some M or emulation, if you will, that can run at 1,000 times the speed of a human brain. So he describes that there's going to be a transition phase lasting about 5 years. But once it finally gets going, it's going to be in full mode, and it's going to happen really, really quickly. And this could affect how humans so-called retire. And so we need to be thinking about job security. And that's kind of where I was going with this. But so this guy's no novice. Listen to this. He's an associate professor of economics at George Mason, and he's a research associate at Oxford University with degrees in physics and philosophy from the University of Chicago and a doctorate in social science from Caltech, and 9 years experience in artificial intelligence research with Lockheed Martin and NASA. So this guy's up there. He's obviously on the edge of tech. So for us to dismiss what he is saying would be pretty ignorant on our part and foolish. And you clump him into people who are speaking on these types of things like Sam Harris and Elon Musk and Ray Kurzweil. He's in good company. So, as I stand back and look at this stuff, and we've all been watching the news and we're diving into things here and we're saying, look, things look pretty grim these days. We got wars, corrupt governments, we got dictators, viruses, antibiotics, superbugs. We've got childish politicians in our country, and you probably do in your country as well. We've got falsely propped up banks, teetering stock markets, clumsy health care. God, it goes on. We've got GMO foods, climate change, collapsing economies, civil unrest. The list goes on. The problem is that we're pretty greedy and selfish and ego-driven fools. And, I joke with some of my friends that if aliens do exist, if they drop down here, they'd be like, what the hell are you fools doing? And who's running this circus? So I think that if you stand back and look at this, we could do a lot better. And imagine having these M's that the brain power is growing faster and faster, and they can do the work at a fraction and a fragment of what our brain power is. They don't get distracted. They don't get hungry. They don't need bathroom breaks, So this stuff is it's moving quickly. And for these guys to predict that some of these things are going to be happening in the next few decades, it's a little scary. And so my proposal is, and the reason why I put this in here is, how are you going to make yourself irreplaceable? You're going to have skills that these machines and computers can't do. You're going to have the combination of dexterity and hands that can feel and touch and eyes that can adjust and program to seeing what's going on in your patient. You're going to have to be able to get on the floor and help them. We've talked about in the last podcast of helping your patients go through their exercises and noticing what they're doing wrong and quickly correct and course correct. And a lot of the times these computers probably aren't going to be able to do this, at least not in our lifetime. So if we can be ahead of the curve and tap into virtual reality and really kind of up our skills, we're certainly going to be at a safer place than most people. And Ivo and I, we've got some stuff invested in where healthcare is going, and specifically with you guys, our listeners. And we want you guys to make sure that you're kind of forward thinking and stepping into the right places here. And so I wanted to share this article with you from that standpoint. But as always, because of your futuristic brain thinking and how you like to look at stuff, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, the first thing when I read the article I thought of is the movie Johnny Mnemonic. Have you seen that?
Which one?
Keanu Reeves, long time ago, set in the future, where there are these people which are virtually messengers. And what would happen is somebody would basically take like what's equivalent to a thumb drive, and through a little plug in the back of your head that you had implanted, it would transfer all that information into your brain. You wouldn't know what it is, but you would be able to carry that sort of like a human jump drive, and then you'd go to point B, and then that information could be downloaded off of your brain onto a big server for another company. And the movie's set in the future where this sort of thing is going on. And the other thing that they would do is sometimes they would overload people's brains. And this was the coolest part. They developed a syndrome called synaptic leakage syndrome. And these individuals were just having too much information in their brains. And sometimes the information would be sensitive, and of course the messenger would have no idea as to what the information was, just that he was transporting it and being paid to do that. So when you sent this article over, that was the first thing reading through it. It's like, oh, this is like Johnny Mnemonic all over again. And if you haven't seen that movie, it's an interesting flick. When you see it, if you've seen The Matrix, which is like one of my all-time favorite movies on the planet, you'll see where they get a lot of the ideas. The Wachowski brothers definitely saw that and said, oh, yeah. But, it's sometimes fact is stranger than fiction, and we are headed more towards AI, artificial intelligence, as things coming along, and it's just a matter of time. I was just thinking the other day, I do a lot of thinking when I'm riding my bike or running or whatever, just about Siri and the whole being able to talk to your phone and say, Siri, what was the, play this song, or can you look this up for me? I need this equation or whatever. And the fact that a computer is basically able to discern what it is that you are looking for. And, we realize it's just a computer, but by the whole thing, it's like we've given her a name, She's got a voice, some pretty nice voices, I have to say. I kind of like the UK girl, and that's who I use on my phone. But this is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow, and all that information, and we've talked about this, who owns your information, in the past in other podcasts, is all being recorded someplace. Like when you're using Siri, that information goes to the cloud and then is interpolated and brought back down, and facts and everything about your behaviors are all being drawn out of that, and that's what's being utilized to pretty much dictate, future programming, sorts of things. And that's why Macs, in a way, are so intuitive in a lot of ways. It's kind of like, oh, well, everybody does this when they want to do this, so let's just build that into the phone. And that's going to not really go away, as long as we continue with technology. That's going to continue. And like you talked about, and a very important point, we're more than just machines. I mean, basically we're biological machines, but we're way more than machines. And by having this unique advantage, or this uniqueness, is what's basically going to let you survive into the future. And the fact that, sure, the machine may be able to take a whole bunch of facts and stuff like this and stick them together, it may not have the acumen to be able to decide, well, this individual has a forefoot varus, and as a result of the forefoot varus, the following is happening, whether that's excessive midfoot pronation, excessive flexion of the knee, lack of ankle dorsiflexion, internal rotation of the leg, lean to the side, whatever the compensation pattern is. Whereas when you're human, you can obviously bring all of those other things in. But the cool thing is we can use all this technology to our advantage. I mean, gosh, I use my iPad daily filming people. And then you can slow it down. If you really want to see something, you can throw it into Coach's Eye, as far as it'll put a grid up there for you, moving things back and forth, playing it backwards, playing it forwards, playing it in super slow motion. Those are all things that we can take advantage of, as well as this impending technological advance continues. And, the other is, if you've watched any of the Avengers movies, you can tell I watch a lot of movies, especially with my kids. You think of Ultron, and Tony Stark character developed Ultron basically as kind of a world peacekeeper. And, if we're not careful, like something like that could happen. Maybe not in our lifetime, but certainly in our children's or our children's lifetime. But it was an interesting article, an interesting read. It's got some really cool graphics in there, and the book looks kind of compelling. I might have to get it on, my phone so I can listen to it going back and forth to work between podcasts or other stuff, or on Sundays when I basically don't do work stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been thinking about this a little further, and this is where there's a bit of a where we tend to butt heads a little bit, is that you like to lecture. And I've kind of lost a little bit of that, but I like to do it in a way that I feel comfortable. And people change, and you and I have, obviously changed a little bit, or I've changed and you've stayed the same. But imagine where lectures are going to go. People aren't going to be spending a day traveling to a lecture anymore. And you and I disagree on this, but hear me out. Imagine sitting at home, maybe with a buddy, with some virtual reality goggles on, and you're sitting in your comfy chair, and all of a sudden Sean and I will pop up, and we're in virtual reality with you. You're in the front row. I mean, we're showing a 4-foot varus, and you are 3 inches away from that 4-foot varus, and I'm taking the foot and moving it through here, and you've got a pointer on it, and if you want to, because of the 360 cameras, you can look around the virtual reality classroom and see everybody else that's in there. You're going to be able to, I'm going to be able to watch, or they're going to be able to watch you put needles into the first lumbrical and show you how to do it, and then you're going to be able to take off your virtual reality glasses and have your buddy right there, and you're going to be able to stick it in their foot, and you're going to be on the screen watching those guys do it, giving them some feedback. And virtual reality just isn't visual. There's tactile stuff that they're developing into this. So in many respects, it may be better than the real world. You're certainly not going to have a back seat in a classroom anymore. And you're going to have, pristine video. It's going to be 4K or 8K by that point. And I just saw a recent 8K television come out. I mean, it's going to be so good. It's going to be better than being there. And so the classroom is going to change. you're not going to have to travel. Time is valuable. You've got a virtual reality tour of Machu Picchu at noon, and Ivo and Sean are lecturing from 9 to 11:30. Heck with that, until 9. We're lecturing from 8 o'clock till 9 to 11:59, because you've got in a minute after that, you've got a virtual reality tour of Machu Picchu. That's better than being there. Does it replace it? No, but I mean, heck, I wouldn't want to travel halfway across the world if I could get a virtual reality tour with a beautiful lady who is giving me the backdoor tour that only the special rich people get, where we'll take you into the bowels of, the complex. So it's just, I see teaching going to a different place here. And so, once again, if you're not going to be on the forefront of technology, you're going to get left behind. And that was kind of where I was going with a lot of this stuff. But I think it's coming. I do think it's coming.
So, two thoughts on that. First one is, yes, I think that as VR evolves, there'll be less and less going to seminars and stuff in person. But with that being said, there's nothing like physically being there, and until they can enhance that experience so that you can touch that foot that has the 4-foot varus and examine it in front of you while sitting in your easy chair in front of your 90-inch computer screen, that there's still going to be some place for live seminars. But in addition to that, webcasting and everything is becoming increasingly more popular. On a related subject, but not exactly the same, have you heard of NextVR?
No.
So NextVR is a technology, and I would invite everybody to just check it out. It's nextvr.com. David Cole, he was on a Tony Robbins podcast that I was listening to, is one of the co-founders of this. And basically what it is it's virtual reality like goggles that you can put on while you're watching a program, and there's limiting programming, and you're basically there. Like if you're in the first row next to mid-court at the basketball game, and you look to the left and you see down the court and you can see the exit sign and people coming and going in and out of the bathroom, and you look to the right and you can see people walking up in the bleachers, and you look behind you and you can see all the people behind you. And they do this with a series of different cameras, and it's almost three-dimensional as far as that goes. And this company, NextVR, is probably going to really revolutionize VR. They are definitely on the cutting edge and forefront. And the applications for this, as you were talking about and alluding to, and bringing this down to an affordable level for the average clinician, are going to be fantastic for teaching. A while ago on our social media page on Facebook, we had some pictures of, this is something like, imagine studying anatomy like this. And it was basically a three-dimensional, Tony Stark-esque view, but the person was there. They moved their hands and did some things on a screen, and then all of a sudden you had a three-dimensional body in front of you that you could spin, slice, move, and everything else. And you're absolutely right. It is coming to that, and probably a few years from now, the technology will be better, and maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, like you said, it'll all just be done from your computer at home, and you don't even have to leave to travel. But yeah, it's pretty incredible stuff, and embracing the technology now, no matter what you're doing, is super important.
Yeah, and I mean, gosh, if they can get the visual part that good, they're going to get the tactile part. You're going to be able to reach out into space, and you're going to be touching a 4-foot varus. You're going to be moving that foot. It's hard to believe that there'll be that tactile translation, but it's probably going to be there if they can do some of this stuff. I mean, it's just amazing. I just read while I was waiting for you to tune into the podcast here that this person, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, was in his car, and they were having some chest pain, and they told their Tesla to take her to the emergency room. I guess she passed out, and the car pulled up in the parking lot of the emergency room, and it saved her life. I mean, we're going in some crazy places really fast, and they talk about a lot of the novelty being gone. I mean, you're gonna have to go to a novelty racetrack to drive a stick car at some point and actually push on a gas pedal, and that's going to be a sad day for me. But let's fire on with the next one here: how prosthetics are working now, and how they will in the future. So this one is Researchers think we may have to protect our brains from hackers in the next few years. Talk about pertinent to what we were just talking about now. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the news about hackers and, hacking brains. Come on, Sean, Ivo, what are you guys talking about? Well, think about this, guys. Strictly speaking, brain control is already here. Doctors are using it in the medical setting, and I'm reading right from the article. This is from some University of Washington biorobotics lab engineered Howard Chiswick. He says there's actually very little time. If we don't address this quickly, it could be too late. They're already using this in medical settings. Game developers are using it for precise control with controllers, and the U.S. military is using it. Controlling a body part or an entire human involves tapping into brain signals, such as EEG, electroencephalography, and manipulating to complete a desired action. They're already using this in robotic fingers and robotic hands and prosthetics. So this is not new, guys. And so the problem with this relative simplicity of bionics, says this gentleman, is that the human control through computers is that we haven't yet figured out how to give computers access to just the brain waves they need while blocking out the rest. And so these guys, one of the biorobotics researchers says, broadly speaking, the problem with brain-computer interfaces is that with most of the devices these days, when you're picking up electrical signals to control an application or a prosthetic, the application is not only getting access to the useful piece of EEG to control the app or device, it's also getting access to the whole EEG. And that whole EEG signal contains rich information about us as persons. So they're talking about a 10-year timeline on this, guys. So not to scare you, but with advancements in technology, as we all know, there are problems. So, but this was just a nice window into looking at how they're controlling some of these prosthetic devices through, your mind using EEG. And this is not new stuff. So what do you think?
Interesting stuff. Again, all the information here. And again, it goes into that whole thing before, as we were talking about, trying to not make people obsolete ultimately there. Again, this really isn't that far from reality, as far as being able to do that. It's just a matter of figuring out more and more of the anatomy. And as we tend to unwrap more and more of the genome and are able to map more and more of that, we have more of an understanding of biogenetics, genetics, and epigenetics that are surrounding that. This really isn't that far off. Of course, you would have to have some sort of an implant that would be done on you for this to be able to occur. The whole, I can control you, from here, is probably stuff of science fiction and alien movies, at least for the time being. But we would need something in there to basically, kind of hack into that person's nervous system. Now, it could be something like a virus that could be inserted into you, and more of a mechanical virus. I mean, we talk about nanotechnology. We've talked about that here before on the blog, on the podcast as well as on the blog. As nanotechnology becomes more and more utilizable, that whole scene in The Matrix where they, he's got that bug inside of him that's pretty much, telling, the bad guys, I'm trying to think of his name, Officer Smith, and all the other people, what's going on, are probably not that far. And, brain control, we think about, people going to some of these seminars and stuff that are just big rah-rah sessions, and, we've got brain control there. Look at Hitler and what was going on there. Just by changing people's perception of what was going on and being a strong speaker, you can certainly influence those things. So a matter of fine-tuning and harnessing those things really isn't that far beyond belief, at this point in time. I don't know the statement, there's actually very little time. If we don't address this quickly, it will be too late. I don't know. What are we going to do to address that? As far as how are we really going? What are we going to put, legislation in place that's going to do that? If you're a conspiracy theorist, something like I am, to some degree, it's sort of maybe the people that you're trusting that are in charge aren't the people that physically, should be in charge of what's going on. So I agree that the problem needs to be, not problem, that's probably the wrong word, but the information needs to be brought to light and people need to be able to make educated decisions. But in this age where everybody is so busy all of the time, I mean, and I do this, I'm guilty of this. It's like, give me the bullet, you know, don't give me, don't tell me how to build a clock. Just tell me what time it is, you know? And I find myself increasingly using more and more filters, whether that's, you know, email downloads or lists that I'm on that mention certain keywords that come in to get me data that I need, or with labs results that I'm awaiting, or stuff that we've done in the office, getting that stuff. I'm looking for something very, very specific. When I have that information, I move on. I'm not necessarily mulling over all of those things. But yeah, it's scary. It's exciting. It's thought-provoking all at once. You know, this would be great stuff, the last 2 articles for a couple stories, you know. As far as, and there's probably out there, I don't do a lot of leisure reading of fiction. You know, most of my, although I have to admit lately I've read a little historical fiction, which is new for me. But you know, it would not surprise me at all, you know, if there's a lot of stuff out there already that's talking about this.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, listen, I thought of you today when I was putting together this. I thought about you yesterday, and I put it in the podcast today, at least our itinerary. And I wanted to hear you talk about this again. And I think it's been a long, long, long time since you talked about it. But I was talking with a patient, and she felt stronger after we did the first round of exercises, and then she felt stronger after the second round of exercises. I usually do one mid-session and then one at the end, just to make sure they're doing the homework better. But she's like, I already feel stronger. How's this possible? And I talked to her about coordination, and how coordination is the first actual changes that occur, and that it takes weeks for strength to start building, and that you actually want to build endurance before strength and that whole thing. But, you know, that whole first stage of coordination, and you had mentioned it in a previous podcast about you know, how that initial phase uses a lot more ATP, and thought it was very interesting. And I thought, well, let's have Ivo talk about that again. It was about regarding new pathways, and the initial strength changes are not true strength. So can you enlighten us?
Sure. There's a great paper that you should get and read, everybody. It's Medicine, Science, Sports, and Exercise, 1988, October. And it's a guy named Digby, D-I-G-B-Y, Sale, S-A-L-E, Aussie. And it's called Neural Adaptation to Resistance Training. And there's many, many other articles. And yes, I know this is 1988, and my gosh, we're almost, 20 years later, 98, 2008, 30 years later. But the information still applies. And I can say that I've learned a lot of this stuff, or got into a lot of this stuff, because of one of my bosses. When I was doing a lot of lecturing on the road, I worked for a guy in New York named Gary Ierna, and I did a lot of lecturing on rehabilitation and different types of training and testing. But anyway, one of the things that I came across was this, and most of the changes you're going to see in the first few weeks of training really have nothing to do, and this was strength training, okay, but it can be applied to any kind of training, is really not... doesn't have anything to do with muscular hypertrophy. It just has to do with neurological efficiency. And what happens, much like, running through a field, the first time you run through, you might not be able to see where you ran. The fourth or fifth time, you might be able to see some of the grass getting beaten down. And as you hit it more and more, you create a path. Well, a nervous system is exactly the same. And as these pathways become more and more ingrained in our nervous system, we make them more efficient. Much like if somebody has pain all the time, the pain pathways become upregulated in the system. And we know now that this is an actual physical phenomena. There are DNA changes which occur both at the peripherally, in the peripheral nervous system, so from the cord out, or external to the cord, I guess, as well as centrally. And it has to do with NMDA receptors, AMPA receptors, and TRVP1 receptors and things like that with regards to pain. And we actually have physical changes which will occur over time in the nervous system. When we're dealing with strength training and stuff like in the gal you're talking about here, we're basically seeing just increased neurological efficiency occurring in that person over time. Proprioceptive things will be some of the first things to respond. Strength is usually second, endurance because endurance is largely muscularly dependent upon blood supply, mitochondrial content, myoglobin, glycogen, etc., is a little bit more, it's going to take a longer time to actually do that. Although, with some of the current research coming out, we might be able to take a pill for that in the future that's going to upregulate all of those things genetically for us. But basically what we're looking at is an increase in neurological efficiency. And these pathways, which are going through, if neuron A connects with neuron B, if your nervous system likes that connection, then what it does is it has more axons that'll sprout out of neuron A and actually connect with neuron B. So that pathway becomes that much more efficient. That's something called neural adaptation. Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize for that in 2000, looking specifically at that. And we have what's called axon collateralization, which are extra little axons growing off of one neuron connecting with another neuron or series of neurons to facilitate that pathway. So this collateralization and neural growth can occur relatively quickly. We're talking, very, very quickly. And the chemical changes occur almost instantaneously, which is why we can see some of these increased changes. And then it's important that we continue to lay those pathways down over time, because anything we use a lot, we're going to keep, and anything we don't use is going to be pruned back, recycled, and reutilized someplace else in the nervous system, which is why it's important to establish good pathways and really downplay the bad pathways. And the bad pathways don't necessarily have to be just a motion pattern. It can be a thought pattern, eating patterns, or anything else. But as you get better, you can become better and better, or as you become worse, you can become worse and worse. Was that what you were looking for?
Absolutely. It's good stuff. This is stuff you need to know, folks, and this is why you can't just take somebody and throw some exercises at them, hoping that it's the right thing and assuming that more weight is better or more repetition is better when you don't have the skill down. There's a logical progression, which is where when I built our skill, endurance, strength mnemonic off of that SES. And so there's reasons why you shouldn't cheat the process. So,
there's a really good Gray Cook quote, and it's something to the effect of, a whole bunch of planks ain't going to fix that. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I think there's an expletive at the end of there that I left off. But it's true. Exercise has to be specific as to, 1, the type of exercise, 2, speed of exercise, and 3, type of contraction. And when we're going to ingrain a new motor pattern, much like Stu McGill talks about in a lot of his research, we really need to be careful as far as what we're teaching the nervous system, on all levels. And sure, if you give people that are extremely deconditioned just a set of exercises that maybe aren't customized, you're going to get results. But that's the difference between that, you're going to get 70% of the people better, or you're going to get 90% of the people better. And the more specific you can be, and the more you can tune things down, and the more, as you like to say, layers of the onion that you peel away, or layers of compensation, then the better results you're going to get, ultimately, I think, with the individuals.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Good stuff. Hey, you sent this one over earlier, and you said, should we tackle this? And I thought, why not? Why don't you take the floor here, and then I'll chime in. And I should say this. We should be... You're usually nicer than I am, but we should be accurate and critical where necessary, if necessary. So, fire away.
So there's a website, Dr. John Rusin, Rusin, the Strength Doc. And it caught my art. And I'll tell you the truth, I came across a Facebook feed from the manual therapist, Ursin, who's a friend of ours. And I was like, oh, I got to check this out. And basically it's a foot that looks like it has abs on it. And the title of it is Advanced Strength Training for the Feet. Well, if anything has to do with anything strengthening or proprioception for the feet, I'm reading it, because that's just me, and I'm a nerd, and I want to know what everybody else knows so I can, stick it in my database. So I looked through the article, and there's, some good information here as far as that. It talks a little bit about the effect of shoes on posture and neurology. It talks about 3 interdependent systems responsible for gathering information. We always describe that as vision, proprioception, as well as the vestibular system. Here they describe them as interoceptors and exteroceptors and proprioceptors. So proprioceptors, of course, being, they're describing them as, receptors within joints, interoceptors being relating information from the organ systems, and exteroceptors being basically our peripheral receptors. So we differ a little bit there, but the idea is they're being scientific and they're going about it. And then they talk about long-term uses and effects of shoes. And I don't know if they say long-term effects of using shoes as a crutch. I don't know if that's necessarily a totally true statement, but shoes certainly do change our biomechanics. And I would...
Can I...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to interrupt for just a second because I don't want to get too far into this. I need to be clear that John did not write this article. Dr. John Rusin didn't write the article. At the very bottom, you'll see the author was Alex Nurse, who's a strength and speed and agility coach. And so there's a bit of a potentially, I'm not saying that he's not a genius and a brilliant guy, but I am familiar with some of John's work, and John does really good work, and I've read a lot of his articles. And this is not written by John, so I just wanted to be clear with that before we went off further, okay?
Oh, yeah, no problem. And in no way are we trying to be critical at all. We're just, our job is to kind of point out where we think, the literature might show otherwise. And,
absolutely.
Maybe jade that with a little bit of some of our, personal clinical findings or things like that. So, just it goes through. It talks a little bit about barefoot. These people appear from, and the takeaway I have is they're definitely barefoot people, and because they talk about the effects of shoes impairing proprioception, how that's going to alter gait. They cite some studies which do that. And then they talk about the big toe, which was probably one of my favorite parts of the article, because the first metatarsophalangeal joint, as we know, forefoot rocker, is vastly important, for a lot of reasons. One, of course, we get lots of proprioception from the feet, but two, very important because if we do not have great toe dorsiflexion sufficient enough to walk normally, and we're talking 50 to 55 degrees of that motion, then you're going to need to develop some sort of a compensation pattern around that mobility, and that sometimes is called hallux limitus. Or if it's a rigid, it's called hallux rigidus, but limited dorsiflexion there. And they talk about that quite a bit. And, one of the best parts, I think, is called the missing link mobility south of the ankle, where they talk a lot about the big toe and activation of the windlass mechanism. And then it goes on talking about moving north of that and how the kinetic chain relates from there. So if you don't have big toe dorsiflexion, where does the motion occur next? And they kind of talk about, passing the buck, as Dr. Allen likes to call it, as we're going through the system. If one joint can't move, then another joint has to make up for that. And they do a nice job describing the different layers of the muscles of the foot. And I was happy to see that the quadratus plantae was bolded. The abductor hallucis was bolded as well, and I don't feel that that's maybe as important as some of the other ones that are in there. And then he just kind of talks about if you're a strength coach, you may want to look at some strength training exercises for the foot, and they go through a series of little YouTube exercises, much like ours, which go through utilizing the short foot exercise as well as some of the other exercises. I would have to say, on first pass, and I didn't watch every video all the way through, but I watched most of it. I don't necessarily agree with all of the exercises as far as what they thought, like first one is the toe wave exercise, and they really are emphasizing dorsiflexion of the great toe, which I suppose actively is a good idea, but you're just not going to use it that way. And emphasizing great toe dorsiflexion while concomitantly exercising long extensor action of the lesser toes may not be the most biomechanically sound way to train the body to do that. And we just talked about cortical changes, neural adaptation, and things like that. There's some mobility exercises there, and then a gait drill that I don't totally understand neurologically what they're trying to accomplish. But basically it's a combination, it appears to me, of gaining great toe mobility while gaining torso rotation. The individual doing the exercise is rotating his body and his head together, so they're really not taking advantage of a tonic neck response with rotation. So I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to accomplish in that particular part. And then they really go into depth about the short foot exercise and then have a bunch of different exercises emphasizing short foot for intrinsic activation, which I think to some degree is important, but we have to remember that when do our intrinsic foot musculature fire? When is it supposed to fire in the gait cycle? It fires from mid-stance basically to terminal stance. So it's important for that, but you have to ask how much translation of the short foot exercise to that is practical going through an entire gait cycle or something like that. So anyway, those were some of my questions and concerns. I thought it was really nice to see an article out there dedicated to the feet, and that always makes me a happy camper when I'm seeing that. But anyway, I'm excited to hear some of your thoughts, and then I have a couple of things we can add if we need to.
Well, I'm glad you took the stance, no pun intended, that you did on this. Again, guys, we're not here to put people down, but one of the problems with the internet is that everybody's throwing up video, and I'm not saying we're not guilty of it either. There's probably some crap we put up 5 years ago that should come down, and I should probably look through that stuff and go, wow, that's antiquated. We need to remove that because we know better now. But there's a lot of stuff out there, and I worry largely because patients come into my office as they do yours and most of our listeners in the audience there, and they're doing stuff that I saw this on so-and-so's page, or I saw this on so-and-so's video YouTube page, and my next question is, so why are you doing that? Well, it seemed like it was pertinent, or they said that would fix this. Kind of the great cook, well, do some planks if your core is weak. Gosh, if it was only that easy. And so my concern is that we at least offer our thoughts on these things so that the well-educated physician and or listener, coach, trainer, etc. might learn that, oh, okay, these guys have brought up some good points. Maybe that doesn't have all of the, the juicy fluids that, the video seems to portray. And I just see some limitations in this as well as you do. I mean, even the toe mobility and the toe wave, I think, could have been done better. But I understand their principles, so I'm not taking away from it. But I don't want someone to think that these 5 things that are being described as advanced strength training for the feet are, in fact, advanced strength training for the feet. So there's some limitations here, and I think we need to update some of our work on this. But I don't think there's enough foot tripod here. I don't know what the gait drill is all about. They're trying to add some rotation, diagonal patterns, and maybe some hip rotation. So we'll have this one in the show notes for you guys. They also talk about Yonda's short foot exercise. I know everybody's still doing it. I still have problems with it. I've written a blog piece about it. I'm not saying it doesn't have value, but I think there's some limitations. I had some of these discussions with Vladimir Yonda personally back in the late 90s when he came to National University into the orthopedics department, and all the residents sat around and we talked with him, and he was there for a couple of days. So, and I brought up some of my concerns. Yes, there was a language barrier there, but I got some nods from him, and hey, that's not a bad thought. But unfortunately, that dialogue never continued. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do have some problems with the short foot exercise. It does do some stuff. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But the foot is not inherently driven, the arch is not inherently driven up by the plantar intrinsics. It is, a lot of it is lifted up by the tib anterior, the toe extensors, the windlass mechanism with additional stability from the tib posterior and the peroneus longus. And negating anterior compartment strength is a huge mistake in restoring the foot. And if you do not address it from that standpoint, the short foot's not going to do it all for you. Okay, you can't just accept that half of the arch is being driven up from the bottom. The arch it's like a bridge. You don't see pilings up underneath the center of a bridge maintaining its arch structure. You see guy wires above for a reason, because it's better stabilized from above than from below. And so just that, there's some food for thought. And so the other things, the box squats and the Yonda short foot lunges and stuff, I'm okay with all these things. But I don't think that this is by any means a comprehensive list of advanced strengthening for the feet, and we just don't want people to take it that way. So,
well, and also semantics here. all these exercises, particularly the yonder short fit exercises, are long-held isometrics. So they're not really strength exercises other than isometric strength. They're more endurance exercises, which I would agree is important. So that's probably just kind of semantics there. But as you pointed out, the job of the intrinsics isn't to prop the arch up. The arch is supposed to be formed when we have contralateral motion of the swing leg coming from mid-stance. That initiates supination, and then the arch is going to be driven by the windlass mechanism, which is totally passive, as well as some of the other musculature that you spoke about, whether we're talking about the anterior musculature, which is basically going to work from mid-stance on, or the posterior musculature, which are largely pronatory decelerators. So we need to get away from that idea, and this is a great point, and maybe this is something that you or I should write, or both of us should write on in the future, is just sort of talking about that. And the foot intrinsics are important for a lot of reasons, but they're not what's propping up the arch. And just because you're doing a foot intrinsic muscle exercise doesn't necessarily mean that's going to give you a more competent arch. It's going to give you a more competent intrinsic musculature of the foot, which again is going to be important during the mid-stance. Now we think about what's happening during mid-stance, right? We have full pronation occurring at full mid-stance, and from mid-stance on is when the foot intrinsics fire. So they are firing more than likely concentrically in an attempt to assist in supination, but that's going to be much more driven by the contralateral lower extremity that's in swing phase, proneus longus, as you pointed out. Not as much tibialis anterior at that point in time because it's not contracting, but certainly some of the posterior musculature of the leg as well. So they're all going to be involved, but again, it's not necessarily that's what's going to be holding it up. And when you're walking around, foot intrinsic musculature shouldn't be firing from the time the heel hits the ground to mid-stance. It shouldn't be. So to train your nervous system to do that is sort of silly. That's like, training people to apply the brakes when they're trying to accelerate. It's just not the same thing. But I think it's nice because somebody's addressing the feet out there, and it's great that this individual took the time to write this, and there's some references, and they did annotate it with videos and stuff. So I think it's good. And certainly if you didn't have competent feet and you did these exercises, it probably will benefit you in some way. But don't take it as a blanket like this is what you need to do. If you're doing this and the problem is your extensor hallucis brevis is weak and you can't get your first ray down, then this isn't really going to help. So we got to figure out what's the issue, what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, most of the stuff, it's not a laundry list, and you just say, I got weak feet, here's some exercises. It's just not that easy. We do it every day, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I can have 15 rotator cuffs come in on Monday, and, Monday, Tuesday, I don't see that many people in a day. I see about 15 people a day, and so I can have 15 rotator cuff problems come in, let's say, in a week. Each one of them is different. The people are different. Their skill set is different. Their endurance, their strength, their range of motion, their capabilities, their body awareness. And so you just can't go to these laundry lists and say these are 5 really good things for strengthening the shoulder or the foot or the knee or the hip or for whatever matter. So there's no problem and no disrespect or hammering of this fellow Alex Nurse. I mean, hey, we appreciate him sticking his neck out there and putting it on the line. I do it every day. If we're writing something that's nonsense, I want someone to write me back saying, dude, you got this wrong, man, and here's some research. And people have done it in the past. I wish people would do it more because, we tend to all get into some habits and we tend to get into routine. That's just who we are as humans. And I'd rather be corrected and get out of a bad routine and a belief system than continue on with the nonsense. So if you guys have a rebuttal to this, please reach out to us. I'm happy. Like Ivo said, there's some good stuff here, but it's not the be-all, end-all, and I just don't think I would call this advanced.
Okay.
I would say it's integrative. I would definitely say it's integrative. He's trying to move it into the gait cycle and integrate some other things. I don't have a problem with that, but I do think there's a lot of things missing here. And just as an example, I mean, you can't go home with hammer toes and throw on some yoga toes and do some squeezing of the yoga toes and think that that's going to strengthen your foot because it's just addressing your flexors and your adductors. It's not quite that simple. Maybe the toes and the hammer toes are reacting to some intrinsic loss of ankle dorsiflexion or forefoot rocker or hip extension. And so, again, you can't just go down to the bottom and say this is where your problem is a lot of the time.
So if you read this article, and hopefully you go online and read it, we have the reference there. At the bottom of the article, there's a Journal of Physical Therapy Science article which is cited in the references. You should pull that article up. It's a free full-text article, and you should read that, talking about immediate effect of the short foot exercise on dynamic balance subjects with people with excessively pronated feet. And go back and look at some of that information as well. But that's a great reference that's in there. So again, we think that they did a good job. We think that there's some information in here that's very good. There are some other areas that I think require more clarification as far as for us to kind of say, okay, that's the case. And like you and I both say, it has to be somewhat specific, and we really just can't blanket these exercises as far as that goes. But anyway, that's enough of that. Although along that line, there was an article that you put in that I want to talk to. I know we're running low on time here, but it was out of JOSPT talking about impaired foot plantar flexor muscle performance in individuals with plantar heel pain in association with foot orthosis use. There's a whole big mouthful. Anyway, why don't you make your comments on this, and then I got a few things I'd like to say.
Well, impaired foot plantar flexor muscle performance. Your plantar flexors are your long toe flexors, your gastroc, your soleus, your tib posterior. You can maybe clump in the proneus into that group, just a small amount, but I think that would be somewhat inaccurate as well. So let's just stick with gastroc, soleus, tib posterior, and long flexors for the most part. So we're looking at impairment of those muscles in people who have heel pain on the bottom of the foot. And they're trying to link it and associate it with foot orthosis use. Well, and I'll let you do the summary of the article here, but one thing that I see in my office a lot is asymmetry of what I call top-end gastroc or top-end heel rise. And so think about having someone who is a distance runner or a sprinter, and they've lost the top 20% of gastroc soleus strength. God forbid they lose some endurance. And we've talked about that in recent podcasts where, if you fatigue out the calf on one side, your ability to control the foot, ankle, and the knee are going to be impaired. And something's got to go. And sometimes that's knee hyperextension, developing some anterior meniscal femoral type impingement syndromes, or some hip extension impairment, or short quads, some obliquity of the pelvis. Let's just not go down that toilet bowl of possibilities. But you need to have top end strength too. If the top end strength isn't there, then the ability of the rest of the muscle to perform is going to be somewhat corrupt and compromised, potentially, especially in the top end gastroc raising or heel raising. Excuse me. In this case, and in those cases, you need to be immediately thinking about, what about Achilles tendonitis? What about Haglund's deformity? What about control of the rear foot inversion, eversion event during the gait cycle? Is there an impairment of heel rise, which means there's going to be a delayed pronatory phase through the mid and rear foot, rear and mid foot stance phases of gait. It's going to delay forefoot loading and the windlass mechanism, and the list goes on. This is why when I harp on, you need to know your basic gait cycles here. And so this article talked about the orthotic use. And so why don't you go ahead before I get too far down the rabbit hole there, and then I'll come back. Go ahead.
Are you sure you don't want to keep going?
Go ahead.
So what they did is they looked at these individuals that were using orthotics. They had 27 people with basically plantar heel pain, and 27 individuals. They age, I believe they sex matched as well, and body mass matched them. And they look at ratings before and after, and they used a rocker board plantar flexion test as well as a paper grip test, which I hate because it just emphasizes flexor function, not extensor function, which in my opinion is way more important, of the greater and lesser toes. And what they found is that people with heel pain, they had lower performance on these tests. In other words, they were not as good at it. And people that had longer duration of orthotic use, this seemed to correlate somewhat with lower performance of the tests as well. And it was a mild correlation. It wasn't a huge correlation, but there was some correlation there. And then in the conclusion, they say ankle, plantar flexor and toe flexor muscle performance was impaired in individuals with plantar heel pain and associated with longer duration of self-reported foot orthoses use. So I think the biggest thing here is, okay, so people that have heel pain had less flexor strength, and people that had heel pain that wore orthotics for longer periods of time seemed to correlate with less strength as well, even less than just people that had a heel pain alone that did not wear orthotics. So I think the big questions here are, number one, why? And then number two, is this totally accurate? And we think about people like, what are the causes of plantar heel pain? And there could be multifactorial, but I think a lot of us would agree that one, impaired ankle rocker is probably one of the hugest determinants of this, and probably found second by impaired forefoot rocker. And those two things taken together can result in it, because the first one, impaired ankle rocker, will cause increased tension over the plantar fascia at the heel from windlass mechanism, engagement or over-engagement. And then at the forefoot, if you have impaired forefoot rocker, it's going to basically do the same thing, except now we're dealing with the forefoot rather than the heel. And this pain will, number one, be reflected upon plantar fascial tension via the windlass mechanism, and number two, pain, because these muscles are supposed to be contracting concentrically, as we just talked about before, during that from mid-stance to terminal stance pre-swing portions of gait. So is this necessarily a bad thing that their plantar flexors are being turned off? We could certainly make the argument and turn this around and say, well, that's a good thing that the plantar flexors are turned off, because most people are way too flexor dominant anyway. So if we want to shut down their plantar flexors, then we should put some pre-stretch into them by putting an orthotic under there and, giving them some heel pain as far as that goes, which is going to decrease that. And if you already have a tight plantar fascia, because those muscles are all, not all of them, but the superficial layer particularly is interdigitating with that plantar fascia. When those muscles contract concentrically, of course, it's going to pull on the fascia to a greater degree. We can cite Tom Meyer's work and a bunch of other people as well. That's going to create that pain. So not totally unexpected. I would have really liked to have seen, okay, what does their extensor strength look like in these people with and without heel pain? And I think there's where we would really see some big changes as far as that goes. But anyway, those are sort of my preliminary thoughts.
Well, those were most of mine too, and I think you covered it in between my early rant and what you covered there. I think we have, really covered it. And it just kind of, maybe I just finish it up with this, that you need to know the normal gait cycle. You need to know normal mechanics and path in the mechanics. You need to know what's going to change when you put an orthotic in a shoe, or a custom-made footbed, or a off-the-shelf orthotic. Is it aggressive? Is it not aggressive? Is it posted correctly? Does it have a cutout on it? I mean, you need to understand these issues. And if you don't, then you're going to miss a lot of what a study like this is talking about. You're not going to know how to read between the lines. Application and use and correction is going to be questionable or misunderstood or glazed over. So there's a lot of issues here. But again, this was just looking at the posterior compartment. What about the anterior compartment? They didn't even go there. I know that wasn't the focus of the study. They can't be all-inclusive, but it's a little bit more complex to this, and just to be looking at the orthotic and plantar flexor, or Achilles pain, or hammer toes, or arch performance, or heel pain, just on these parameters, is slightly jaundiced at best. So consider the bigger picture and do your reading. But it's our job sometimes just to pull these things out and have a dialogue, and I think Ivo did a good job with that.
Well, you realize that none of our readers all already knew this already. Okay, the people that are listening to this said, of course, looking at plantar flexion and plantar flexor strength is silly in people with heel pain. We really want to assess, like we were talking about, ankle rocker and forefoot rocker. But that's because these folks have been with us for a long time. They read the blog, they listen to the podcasts, they have academic debates with us, sometimes online and sometimes offline, as far as that goes. But anyway, thank you for putting that in. It correlated very nicely with the other materials that we had talked about today. And again, I'm always interested in reading stuff about foot strength and plantar fasciitis and things like that. So.
There he is with the nice thick layer of frosting on the end here to make you feel good about yourself. That's what I love about him. So, listen, folks, we're on the same journey with you. So I had to look at this study twice and go, what in the world are they actually talking about? Because this is a mouthful. So, never a bad thing. Stretch your mind a little bit, not just your hamstrings. So anyways, we're going to do, I'm not sure what we're doing for sponsorships on this show. We're going to leave that. You can go back to the beginning and listen to the sponsors if there are any. If you'd like to sponsor our show, please reach out to us, TheGaitGuys@gmail.com. I wanted to thank you guys again for being patient earlier in the or later part of the summer there for our little bit of a sabbatical. When I need downtime too. So anyways, great podcast, buddy. Thanks for your time on a Friday afternoon. I hope you have a good weekend. And to our listeners, you too, have a good weekend. I'm Sean Allen in Chicago.
Ivor Whirl up in Dillon, Colorado, and we will see you in the shoe aisle. And the reason is because we've got gate cameras everywhere.